Hello, everyone. I'm Andy Harrington, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Foodgrains Bank.
Hi there, my name is Rick Cober Bauman, and I serve as Executive Director of Mennonite Central Committee Canada.
And this is Get to Know Your Canadian Foodgrains Bank member. So, Rick, welcome, and tell us a little bit about the work of Mennonite Central Committee Canada.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be with you. Thanks for your leadership there at CFGB, or here at CFGB, because we're very much together in this. Mennonite Central Committee, we celebrated in a rather muted way 2 years ago our centennial. We were founded in Ukraine in 1920. So these last few weeks and months have been quite horrific in a particular way for our community. At the same time, there's been a lot of generosity as an attempt to help MCC respond both now and in the long term to the horrific damages and harms in Ukraine. So we are in part a humanitarian, an emergency response organization. We are also a development organization, which of course includes a lot of our agriculture, food security work. A lot of that is where we meet CFGB projects. And then we're also a peace building organization. So our tagline is relief, development, and peace in the name of Christ. And that's something that has been emerging over time and became very clear in especially the last decades and the last few years as we celebrated our centennial. So we work some domestically, but primarily internationally in about 45 countries.
And like you say, it must have been a very difficult time for you at the moment with what we're seeing in Ukraine. I can only imagine how that's kind of hit the staff, hit the team, and hit all those involved in the history of MCC.
Yeah, and a lot of our donors, a lot of our supporters have their own familial histories. Many Mennonite people in Canada have origins in Ukraine a few generations back. So that's added a special hurt, I think, to all of this. I think it's also sparked some of the generosity that I mentioned. And we also have a lot of people saying, how do we both hold Ukraine in focus as well as remember our friends in the DRC or in Ethiopia, other places where violent conflict is making life really, really difficult for many people. So there's always the being responsive to what's right in front of us and what is capturing our attention in the news without letting go and sort of abandoning those other communities that we also want to be attentive to.
I think we all feel that, especially when one crisis comes along and then precedes another crisis and another crisis, and yet there is so much that we're involved in across the world. And actually, I would imagine you've seen some things in your work. So tell us about a memorable visit you've made in your time at MCC.
Yeah, one that often comes to the fore. It was very early in my role as MCC Canada. I've been involved with MCC for a long time, so spent some time in Indigenous communities, in Labrador, here in Ontario. But internationally, I would have to say it was a visit amongst the pastoralist community in Uganda, who was in the midst of a food security project with MCC and other local partners. And somehow I came out of this Canada space where there's all this debate about climate change and what are the causes and how serious is it. And here I was amongst pastoralists who were beginning to experiment with some other, what we would call market garden crops. And there wasn't any debate about climate change or its impact. I was in the conversation through an interpreter, of course, but certainly the English term climate change was not up for discussion or debate. It was a given. The impact that this community was feeling, serious food shortages as a result of changing climate patterns. And yeah, it was kind of a turning point for me to come back and say, that doesn't mean everybody else sees climate change that way in my home country here in Canada, but it certainly means we have stories that are authentic, rooted in our partners, and those are the stories that we need to tell and bring to the fore as MCC does its part to both on the adaptation side and as well as the mitigation side as we do our part around climate change. So that was a grounding kind of story, an encounter for me.
I just had the opportunity to visit one of your projects in Rwanda with the Peace and Development Network local partners, and had a very similar experience actually, as all these things that we debate and talk about fall away when you meet the people on the ground living through it and finding the solutions. So I totally agree with that. And one of the things that I experienced when I was there is that sense of God's invitation into the work that we're doing. Is there a verse that you hold on to when you think of the difficulties that we have as we deal with a worldwide hunger crisis?
Lately I've been thinking a lot about Isaiah 55. It's about water and food. That why do you keep? I don't have it in front of me, but why do you go after the water that doesn't really quench and the food that doesn't really satisfy? And certainly at one level, it's a water and food verse. But I think in my work at MCC, I'm also reminded that a lot of what doesn't satisfy is simply kind of looking out for ourselves. And what are the things that are in our immediate control that we want to control and make sure our lives turn out well. And yet when at the end of the day, that's not the most satisfying way to live as individuals or families or communities. And what's really satisfying, of course, is to give yourself in the service of others and making a contribution that's broader than your own self. And so I love that call to seek after the water that really quenches and the food that really nourishes, because in a way we're doing that physically with our neighbors in Uganda, but in the end there is a depth of nourishment for us too. There's a mutual transformation, is language we often use at MCC, that when we're truly engaged with partners, walking with, there's something mutual about that, and that's the food that doesn't leave us hungry the next day.
I completely resonate with that. So many times I've found myself in some of the places that we've worked over the years, or I've worked elsewhere, and with other people, and we've thought, hey, we're going here to change things. It's actually us that gets changed. It's that mutual transformation. Service is the heart to that. And as you think about that, as you think about the work you're doing, the service you're doing, what are you most excited about right now?
Well, I think generosity. I'm struck by how, as painful as the pandemic has been, and of course that pain is on a broad spectrum, that it's not affected me in nearly the same way as it's affected many of our partners internationally, or many of my own colleagues at MCC. And it would have been in some ways a time when people could have thrown up their hands, been more despairing, been more prepared to say this project of responding to injustice and poverty and hunger is just too big for us. And yet it's not happening. I mean, if anything, the opposite is happening. We have partners who are sort of digging in and saying, new obstacles, and yet we're up to this, and we're going to face these new obstacles. We have donors who are, in spite of crazy inflation and the other things that might have, along with the pandemic, caused a more despairing attitude. We see the opposite. People are digging deeper and saying, we want to be involved. We resonate with relief, development, and peace in the name of Christ. We want to be part of this, and sort of join hands with neighbors and find innovative and creative solutions. So I'm pretty excited by the generosity that I see and feel and sense around us. It's remarkable, and I'm really grateful.
It is something we see across the world, but it's something that's also very uniquely Canadian, that people care, that they reach out, that they have an understanding of not just their own community, but global community. And it's actually one of the things we love at the Foodgrains Bank, of being a wide community. What is it that you like about being a member of the Foodgrains Bank?
There's hardly any other places where I get to come and sit down with my co-religionists, my Christian community, and be this focused on a really practical matter. Ending world hunger, daunting. I'm not going to see it in my lifetime. I'd love to, but I'm no less committed to it. And then seeing the other 14 members around the table similarly committed and bringing the gifts that they have, and then as a faith community being taken seriously by our government. By we live in a pretty secular world, and to have the church community step up and be welcomed, generously dealt with. That's an exciting community to be part of. So, yeah, being there as part of the Christian community, being welcomed in the broader society, and knowing that we've got a daunting but a task that we're not going to despair of. That's an exciting place to be. So, again, Andy, really grateful for your leadership at the bank.
Well, I appreciate that, Rick. We're honestly, our members make it happen, and we work for our members in every way, and we couldn't be anywhere if we weren't members in this together. I so resonate with what you said. I love the fact that we can represent a side of Christianity, a face of Christianity, to the government, to the community, to the Canadian public as a whole, that says this is Christ in action. This is Christ-like love. This is what it looks like. Rick, I want to thank you for being here today. Who's that? Who we got here?
This is my little friend Strublik. Strublik just had a litter of 5, and she's out for a little mama break right now, out here on the patio with me. So when we're done, you got to go back in and feed those babies.
Well, thanks to both you, Rick, and Strublik for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. And thanks so much for all that you and MCC do. We are deeply appreciative of all of your work. Thanks very much.
So good to be with you. Thanks again.